All right, good afternoon and welcome to the SCSA's Wednesday webinar. Before we begin, I just want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded. It'll be available for later viewing on Facebook and our YouTube channel. So if you're not following our social media accounts, make sure that after the webinar, you give this video a like and a share and follow our pages to keep up to date on safety information in Saskatchewan. So my name is Justin Brooks. I'll be moderating this webinar and presenting. I'm an advisor here at the SCSA, and following suit, I just wanted to give our panelists a moment to introduce themselves as well. So Kieran, let's start with yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Kieran. I work out of the Saskatoon office as a safety advisor, just like Justin.
Hey, it's Mike Moore, safety advisor out of Saskatoon.
Mike, you almost look like you're live from Rona right now.
Yeah, I wish I had all Rona supplies here.
No kidding, eh? Awesome. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about WHIMIS. So just give me one moment here and I will share my screen. All right, so let's move forward here. So WHIMIS 2015. So what is WHIMIS? So WHIMIS stands for the Workplace Hazardous Material Information System. It's a comprehensive system for providing health and safety information on hazardous products intended for use, handling, or storage in the Canadian workplaces. WHIMIS has aligned with the Worldwide Hazard Communication System known as GHS, the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals. Aligning with GHS provides many benefits, including hazard classification criteria, more comprehensive, which improves ability to indicate severity of hazards. New hazard classes are included. Physical hazard criteria are consistent with the transportation of dangerous goods, so TDG regulations. Standardized language, hazard and precautionary statements, standardized SDS formats, and more comprehensive requirements. So a little more on the what is the Global Harmonized System. So again, GHS stands for Globally Harmonized System, an internationally agreed upon system created by the United Nations, designed to replace the various classifications and labeling standards used in different countries by using a consistent method for classification, safety data sheet information, symbols, and labeling of an international level. This will harmonize the movement of hazardous products globally. So what is WHIMIS 2015? So on February 11, 2015, the Government of Canada published the Hazardous Products Regulations, so the HPR. And these acronyms come up a few times in the webinar. In the Canadian Gazette Part 2. The Workplace Hazardous Material Information System, WHIMIS, Canada's National Hazard Communication Standard, is being modified to incorporate the Global Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, an internationally recognized standard for hazard classification and communication, known as the GHS. New requirement within the Hazardous Products Regulation, HPR, and the Hazardous Product Act, HPA, will bring forth changes to the existing WHIMIS of 1988. The Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, WHIMIS 2015, will align Canada's system with the United Nations Hazard Communication Standard and the United Nations Regulations Recommendations. The requirements for worker safety will remain the same federally through Health Canada or through each provincial and territorial authority, in that all employees must be trained and competent to comply with the new regulations of WHIMIS 2015. So how has it impacted Canada? So here in North America, the then Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, and the once President of the United States, Barack Obama, announced a joint action plan for Canada's U.S. Regulatory Cooperation Council on December 7, 2011. Made a commitment to align and synchronize implementation of common classification and labeling requirements for workplace hazardous chemicals. This announcement has committed Canada to the implementation of the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals for workplace chemicals in Canada. What this means is that the then current WHIMIS of 1988 regulations will be changed to meet the GHS regulations established by the United Nations, as well as the requirements and recommendations of the United Nations. Canada has chosen to omit some classification requirements and pictogram symbols within the Canadian WHIMIS legislation. So we're only going to be discussing the ones today that have been adopted by Canada. Environmental hazards and aquatic toxicity do not fall within the jurisdiction of Health Canada, and therefore have been omitted from WHIMIS 2015. These, however, are regulated by other federal and provincial territorial legislations. So the main components of WHIMIS are hazard identification, product classification, labeling, safety data sheets, and worker education and training. So we're going to speak more on these topics throughout the webinar today. So a very common question is WHIMIS law? Yes, is the short answer. WHIMIS first became law in 1988 through a series of complementary federal, provincial, and territorial legislation and regulations. Its original system will be identified as WHIMIS 1988. So updates to implement GHS are referred to as WHIMIS 2015. So the who's who. So under WHIMIS 2015, a supplier is a person in who the course of business sells or imports a hazardous product. A manufacturer is a supplier who in the course of business in Canada manufactures, produces, processes, packages, or labels a hazardous product and sells it. An importer is a supplier who brings a hazardous product into Canada but does not sell the product, and a distributor is a Canadian supplier to whom a hazardous product was sold and who then resells a hazardous product without modifying it in any way. If a distributor does modify a hazardous product that they purchased, so for example, by repackaging or relabeling it, and subsequently sells it, then the distributor meets the definition of a manufacturer. So you should also know that if you're an employer who imports a hazardous product only for use in your own workplace, you are considered to be an importer and are responsible for compliance with all WHIMIS 2015 supplier requirements. So when we talk about the products that WHIMIS covers, the hazardous product regulations set out specific hazard classification criteria. If a product covered by the Hazardous Product Act meets the criteria to be included in a hazard class or category, it is considered to be a hazardous product. All hazardous products used in the workplace are covered by the WHIMIS regulations, and a WHIMIS program, including education and training, must be in place. So we often get asked about the exclusions when it comes to WHIMIS. So the exclusions under WHIMIS 2015 are explosives as defined in the Explosive Act, cosmetic device, drug, and food as defined in the Food and Drugs Act, pest control products as defined in the Pest Controls Product Act. We'll talk about this next one a little bit later in the webinar as well as after the webinar. Consumer products as defined in the Canada Consumer Product Safety Act. Wood or products made of wood. Nuclear substances within the meaning of the Nuclear Safety and Control Act that are radioactive. Hazardous waste being a hazardous product that is sold for recycling or recovery or is intended for disposal. Tobacco and the tobacco products as defined in the Tobacco Act. Manufactured articles. Many of these products are covered under other legislation. So to note that while a product may be exempt from the requirement to have a WHIMIS label or SDS, employers must still provide education and training on the health effects, safe use, and storage if they're used in the workplace. This is exceptionally important with what we're dealing with now with COVID. More and more businesses are using stronger cleaning products, so it's extremely important to educate your employees on the products that they're using. Suppliers are the organizations who in the course of business sell or import hazardous products. Suppliers must ensure that the appropriate classification for hazardous products. That classification is determined based on the comparison of all available hazard data for the ingredients or mixture to the WHIMIS requirements as outlined in the Hazardous Products Regulations, so WHIMIS 2015. When a product is considered to be a hazardous product, the supplier must label the product or container, and they must provide a safety data sheet to their customers. The purpose of the label is to clearly identify the hazardous product, the supplier, the hazards and precautionary measures. The SDS provides more information about that product. Let's speak a little bit on the employer duties. When a hazardous product is used in the workplace, employers are required to educate and train workers on the hazards and safe use of products, ensure that hazardous products are properly labeled, prepare workplace labels as needed, prepare SDSs as necessary. So for example, if an employer manufactures a hazardous product that is used on site, that's when you would prepare an SDS. Provide access to up-to-date SDSs to workers. So this includes possibly name changes of a product. Ensure appropriate control measures are in place to protect the health and safety of workers. And the worker duties. Workers will participate in WHIMIS education and training programs, take necessary steps to protect themselves and their coworkers, and participate in identifying and controlling hazards. So this is the part on consumer products I was speaking to. So what happens if consumer products are used in the workplace? Consumer products are those products that can be purchased in a store and are generally intended to be used in the home. They often include cleaning products, adhesives, or lubricants. These products are labeled according to other legislation. A comprehensive chemical safety program would include both hazardous products as regulated by WHIMIS and any other products that a worker may be exposed to, which includes consumer products. Workers should still receive education and training for safe use of these products. So what happens when an inspector visits the workplace? So inspectors have the authority to make sure that the employer requirements specified in the occupational health and safety legislation are being followed. In addition, some inspectors have been trained and designated to conduct inspections and enforce compliance with the supplier requirements with the Hazardous Products Act and/or the Hazardous Products Regulations. Inspectors may enter a workplace if they have reasonable grounds to believe that an activity related to WHIMIS is being conducted at that place, or a thing to which the legislation relates, for example, a hazardous product, is located in that place. In some cases, inspectors may be determining if products are arriving from suppliers with the required labels and SDSs. In other cases, they may be determining if there's a compliant WHIMIS program in the workplace. So employers should be, for example, be prepared to demonstrate that a WHIMIS program is actually in place. Show where the SDSs are for hazardous products used in that workplace. Show that hazardous products in use have the appropriate labels, and show education and training records for workers who work with or may be exposed to that hazardous product. Inspectors may also need to speak to workers to confirm that education and training has taken place. Workers should be able to answer these questions for every hazardous product they work with. So for example, what are the hazards of the product? How do I protect myself from those hazards? What do I do in case of an emergency? And where can I get further information? Suppliers of hazardous products may, for example, be asked to demonstrate that they are preparing and maintaining true copies of labels and safety data sheets in both official languages and documents detailing the required sales and purchasing information. Inspectors may also examine safety data sheets and labels to verify compliance with the requirements of the HPA and/or the APR. So now we're on to hazard classes. So WHIMIS 2015 applies to two major groups of hazards, physical and health. Each hazard group includes hazard classes that have specific hazardous properties. Physical hazards group, based on the physical or chemical properties of the product, such as flammability, reactivity, or corrosivity to metals. Health hazard group, based on the ability of the product to cause a health effect, such as irritation, respiratory sensitization, so may cause allergies or asthma symptoms if breathing difficulties if inhaled, and carcinogenicity, may cause cancer. GHS also defines an environmental hazard group. This group and its classes was not adopted in WHIMIS 2015. However, you may see the environmental classes listed on labels and safety data sheets, including information about environmental hazards is allowed by WHIMIS 2015. Now that we're in this part of the presentation, this is the section where you're going to see me bumble on some words, so be prepared for that. Oh, went too far. Trying to get past all the words I can't pronounce. All right, so hazard classes are a way of grouping together products that have similar properties. Most of the hazard classes are common to GHS, will be used worldwide by all countries that have adopted GHS. Some hazard classes are specific to WHIMIS 2015. As you can see, when we're splitting the physical hazards and health hazards, we go through, and we're gonna talk about this a little bit more later, but flammable gases, flammable liquids, self-heating substances and mixtures, corrosive to metals, and then your health hazards, acute toxicity, skin corrosion, irritation, reproductive toxicity, aspiration hazards, health hazards not otherwise classified. So when we talk about the hazard categories, each hazard class contains at least one category. Hazard categories are assigned a number, so for example, 1 or 2. Categories may also be called types. Types are assigned in alphabetical order, so A, B, C. In a few cases, subcategories are also specified. Subcategories are identified with a number and a letter, so 1A, 1B, so on. Some hazard classes have only one category, so corrosive to metals, for example. Others may have 2 categories, or 3, so say like oxidizing liquids. There are a few hazard classes with 5 or more categories, for example, organic peroxides. The category tells you about how hazardous a product is. That is the severity of the hazard. Category 1 is always the greatest level of hazard. That is the most hazardous within that class. If a Category 1 is further divided, Category 1A within the same hazard class is greater than a Category 1B. Category 2 within the same hazard class is more hazardous than a Category 3, and so on. There are a few exceptions to this rule. So, for example, for the gases under pressure hazard class, hazard categories are compressed gas, liquefied gas, refrigerated liquefied gas, and dissolved gas. These classes relate to the physical state of the gas when packaged and do not describe the degree of hazard. The objective isn't to remember how many categories are in each hazard class. The key point here is to remember that a Category 1 in any hazard class has the greatest degree of hazards, and then move on and go from there. So pictograms. So what's a pictogram? Pictograms are a graphic image that immediately shows the user of the hazardous product what type of hazard is present. With a quick glance, you can see, for example, that a product is flammable, or it might be a health hazard. Most pictograms have a distinctive red square set on one of its points border, which is a fancy way of saying a diamond. Inside this border is a symbol that represents potential hazard. So, for example, fire, health hazard, corrosive. Together, the symbols and the border are referred to as a pictogram. Pictograms are assigned to specific hazard classes or categories. So let's go through some of these now. After a sip of coffee. All right, so the first one is your flame. So this covers your flammable gases, flammable aerosols, liquids, solids. As you can see, the list is quite large compared to any other of the pictograms. Next is your flame over circle. So this is your oxidizing gases, oxidizing liquids, and oxidizing solids. Then you have gases under pressure, and we spoke about this earlier. So your compressed gas, liquefied gas, refrigerated liquefied gas, and dissolved gas. And these are just the different states that that gas can come in. Next up is corrosion. So these are corrosive to metals, skin corrosion, irritation, serious eye damage, eye irritation, exploding bomb, self-reactive substances and mixtures, so types A and B, and organic peroxides. Skull and crossbones, so your acute toxicity, oral, Category 1, 2, and 3, dermal, which is through the skin, Category 1, 2, and 3, and inhalation, Category 1, 2, and 3. Now you have one of the newer ones, health hazard, which is your respiratory or skin sensitization. Here's some of those words I have trouble spitting out. Germ cell mutanogenicity. You can read the slide. I can't say those words, or I'm not going to butcher it for everyone. Reproductive toxicity, specific target organ toxicity, and aspiration hazards. Exclamation mark, which is your acute toxicity, skin corrosion, irritation, serious eye damage, eye irritation, respiratory or skin sensitization, and specific target organ toxicity. And then your biohazardous infectious material, which is a Category 1 always. All right, so let's speak to labels now. So which products require a WHIMIS 2015 label? In Canada, WHIMIS legislation requires that products used in the workplace that meet the criteria to be classified as hazardous products must be labeled. Labels are the first alert to the user about the major hazards associated with that product and outline the basic precautions or safety steps that should be taken. In most cases, suppliers are responsible for labeling the hazardous products that they provide to customers. Note that labels should be affixed to, printed on, or written on, and or attached to the hazardous product or the container and remain legible. Providing a WHIMIS 2015 label along with the shipping papers would not be considered to be in compliance. Employers are responsible for making sure that the hazardous products that come into the workplaces are labeled and to prepare and apply a workplace label when appropriate. There are two main types of WHIMIS labels, supplier labels and workplace labels. Suppliers of hazardous products are required to apply a label that meets the requirements of the hazardous products regulations. The hazardous product is always used in the container with the supplier label. No other labels required. A workplace label is required when a hazardous product is produced, made at the workplace, or used in that workplace. A hazardous product is decanted, so transferred or poured into another container, or a supplier label becomes lost or illegible, so unreadable. There are two situations when a workplace label is not necessary. When a hazardous product is poured into a container, it is going to be used immediately or under the control of the person who decanted it. So for example, when the person who poured the product into another container will be the only person who uses it, and that product will be used during one shift, a full workplace label may not be required. However, the container must still be identified with the product identifier, so what it's called, what its name is. If the product is not being used right away, or if more than one person will be in control of that product, a full workplace label is required. Note that a company may have specific rules about labeling containers that are above or exceed WHIMIS requirements, which I highly recommend. So when you look at a supplier label, we're just going to go through a couple of the some of the things that you're going to see on there. So first is your product identifier. So the brand name, chemical name, common name, generic name, or trade name of the hazardous product. Initial supplier identifier, so the name, address, and telephone number of either the Canadian manufacturer or the Canadian importer. Pictograms, which we just went through, as the hazard symbol within a red square set on one of its points. Signal word, a word that is used to alert the reader to a potential hazard and indicate the severity of the hazard. Hazard statement, standardized phrases which describe the nature of the hazard posed by the hazardous product. Precautionary statement, standardized phrase that describe measures to be taken to minimize or prevent adverse effects from resulting exposure to a hazardous product or resulting from an improper handling or storage of a hazardous product. And then supplemental label information. So if anybody has taken WHIMIS before, that hatch border that was required under WHIMIS 1988 is not required under WHIMIS 2015. However, it's not also forbidden to use the hatch border, so you may see it on a WHIMIS 2015 label. All right, so safety data sheets. So what is an SDS? So safety data sheets are summary documents that provide information about the hazards of a product and advice about safety precautions. SDSs are usually written by the manufacturer or supplier of the product. In some circumstances, an employer may be required to prepare an SDS. So for example, when the product is produced and used exclusively in that workplace. SDSs provide more detailed hazard information about the product than the label. They're an important resource for workplaces and workers to help learn more about the products used. Use this information to identify the hazards of the products you use and to protect yourself from those hazards, including safe handling and emergency measures. SDSs tell users what the hazards of the product are, how to use the product safely, and what to expect if the recommendations are not followed, how to recognize symptoms of exposure, and what to do if emergencies occur. So do I need an SDS? If a product covered by the Hazardous Products Act meets the criteria to be included in a hazard class or category, it is considered to be a hazardous product. The official definition of a hazardous product is hazardous product means any product, mixture, material, or substance that is classified in accordance with the regulations made under subsection 15.1 in a category or subcategory of a hazard class listed in Schedule 2. In other words, every product that is classified as a hazardous product under WHIMIS that is intended for use, handling, or storage in a workplace in Canada must have an SDS. The information elements provided on a safety data sheet must be in both official languages of Canada, so English and French. The SDSs may be provided as one bilingual SDS or two SDSs, so one in both English and French. In situations where two separate SDSs are used, both the English and French parts must be provided to the purchaser at the same time. Providing an SDS in only English or French would not be considered to be in compliance. And we're going to go through receiving those SDSs shortly here. So here's the information that's located on an SDS. So for identification, hazard identification, composition, information on ingredients, first aid measures, firefighting measures, accidental release measures, handling and storage, exposure controls, personal protection, physical and chemical properties, stability and reactivity, toxicological information, ecological information, disposal considerations, transport information, regulatory information, and then other information. So that's the date of the latest revision of that SDS. So providing SDSs to customers. Now, this is important as a customer to know. A supplier will provide the SDS in English and French to the purchaser of the hazardous product, either in hard copy, so by mail, hand deliver, etc., or by electronic means. So now when we talk about electronic means, acceptable electronic delivery methods include an email from the supplier to the purchaser with the SDS attached, or a USB or disk in which the SDS is saved and given to the purchaser. In the case where English and French portions of the SDS are two separate parts, both the English and French parts must be attached in the same email or saved in the same USB stick or disk. Note, it's not acceptable to provide an SDS by only providing the purchaser of the hazardous product with a website address or hyperlink from which the purchaser may download the SDS for the hazardous product that they purchased. They have to be sent to you. So when it comes to employer responsibility, employers will be required to make sure that all hazardous products, as defined by the hazardous product regulations, have an up-to-date SDS when it enters the workplace. The SDSs must be readily available to the workers who are exposed to the hazardous product and to the Health and Safety Committee or representative. Employers may computerize the SDS information as long as all employees have access to and are trained on how to use the computer device. The computer devices are kept in working order, and the employer makes a hard copy of the SDSs available to the employee or the Health and Safety Committee representative upon request. As mentioned, in some circumstances, an employer may be required to prepare an SDS. So for example, when the product again is produced and used in the workplace. So when it comes to workers using SDSs, as a worker, people often ask, like, when would I ever even use the SDS? Like, my employer will just tell me what I need to know. Here's the thing, you always have to be familiar with the hazards of a product before you start using it. You should look at an SDS, match the name of the product on the container, which is why it's so important to have the most up-to-date, because sometimes product names change. Match the name of the product on the container to the one on the SDS, then know the hazards, understand safe handling and storage instructions, as well as understanding what to do in an emergency. You can think of the SDS as having four main purposes. It provides information on identification for the product and supplier, hazards, so physical and health, we talked about those earlier, prevention, steps you can take to work safely, reduce or prevent exposure or in emergencies, and response, appropriate responses in various situations, so first aid, fire, and accidental release. It's absolutely imperative that workers know what they're getting into when working with certain chemicals, and this is going to provide all the information on personal protective equipment that they require for working with those chemicals. Let's talk about training now. So we're often asked if there's a difference between education and training. People kind of lump them together a lot. Education and training can be thought of now as two separate parts. Well, not now, they always have been, but education refers to the general or portable information, such as how WHIMIS works and the hazards of the products. For example, you will learn about the hazard classes, why a product is called a corrosive, and what information you can find on labels and SDSs. Anybody that's taken our SCOT training through our online our website is familiar with this. Training refers to the site and job-specific information to employees that will cover your workplace's procedures for storage, handling, use, disposal, emergencies, spills, and what to do in unusual situations. So in Canada, if workplace uses hazardous products, there must be a WHIMIS program in place. Workers must be educated and trained so that they understand the hazards and know how to work safely with hazardous products. All workers who work with hazardous products or who may be exposed to hazardous products as part of their work activities must learn about the hazard information for these products. The hazard information should include the information received from the supplier, as well as any other information that the employer is aware of about the use, storage, and handling of each product. As an example, this education and training will include all workers who may be exposed to hazardous products due to their work activities. So that includes normal use, maintenance activities, or emergencies. Use, store, handle, or dispose of a hazardous product. They might not even be using it, they just might be moving it around. Supervise or manage workers who may be exposed or use, store, handle, or dispose of a hazardous product and are involved in emergency responses. In my time in construction, a lot of times, not that when there's nothing to do, but it's an important part of the job in commercial is to eventually at some point clean up the CCAN. This often happens at the end of a job so that it's ready for the next job. A lot of times there's things in the CCAN that you kind of maybe forgot about. That's why it's so important to have a full, complete SDS so that if a worker is required to remove something from a top shelf, what if it spills? So it's a really good, it's imperative that you have not only a good idea on what chemicals you may have on site, but the SDSs to match these chemicals and products as well, because again, they may not be using them, they may just be handling them. So topics to be covered. So examples of topics that should be covered during education and training include the information on both the supplier label and workplace label, and what that information means. The information on safety data sheets, so SDSs, and what that information means. The procedures required for safe use, handling, and disposal of a hazardous product. Any other procedures required when the product is in a pipe, piping system, vessel, tank, car, etc. The procedure to follow if the hazardous product may be present in the air and a worker may be exposed. All procedures that must be followed in an emergency that involve that hazardous product. So training at the SCSA. So the SCSA WHIMIS 2015 Train the Trainer is developed in partnership with SASM to support the needs of the Saskatchewan construction industry. This one-day course is designed to familiarize participants with the WHIMIS 2015 system and how it's used in the workplaces. Learning about WHIMIS 2015 is part of the knowledge workers need to protect themselves and their coworkers from hazardous products. This course, through material presentation and discussion, also provides direction for the development and training of your organization's site-specific training requirements. The day ends with presentations and discussions on promising practices from industry to help tie this all together. So the course focuses an overview of WHIMIS, overview of the hazard groups and classes, understand the roles and responsibilities of suppliers, employers, and workers in WHIMIS 2015, develop awareness and understanding of physical hazards set out by WHIMIS, develop awareness and understanding of health hazards, develop awareness and understanding of labels, including required label elements as set out by WHIMIS 2015, gain an understanding of the hazard classes through practical examples and discussion, gain an understanding of awareness and the use of safety data sheets. The Train the Trainer component of this will assist you in assessing your site-specific training needs, and presentation discussion, promising practices and approaches to making WHIMIS work for you and your organization. I don't know why it always cuts out that last slide there, but so this training course for WHIMIS 2015 Train the Trainer will be available next month, as we're hoping to have that launch available for everyone. So stay tuned to our website and our webinars for the full details on the release and training schedules. So that is it. Now I talked about some information on consumer products that I know, Kieran, you have kind of queued up. First, let's get to some of the questions, though, if you guys don't mind. So this can kind of go to anybody here on the panel. So besides generic WHIMIS, how else do I need to train my workers on regarding WHIMIS? Oh, you're muted, Mike.
No more. So thanks, Justin. The generic WHIMIS is a requirement just to get to know the system. So what is global harmonization? What is WHIMIS? What are pictograms? How does that system work? And then there is a need for specific company training when it comes to the control products that they use. So if you're in some sort of cleaning outfit, you're going to have to be trained on the exact cleaners you're using, maybe the PPE, first aid measures, some of the, if there's airborne contaminants, whatever it is, you need to be trained in those specific products as well. And that's how they work kind of together. So there's the generic WHIMIS training, and then there's going to be some WHIMIS training that's in-house as well for the company.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like as we talked about with those consumer products, for any products they might come in contact with, it's absolutely imperative, and that annual review is also imperative, and it's the law. I mean, we have to be update on our WHIMIS training and make sure that we're receiving that consistently. Again, our Scott training is a very valuable resource. It takes anywhere from 3 to 4 hours depending on the person, and part of that is getting their generic WHIMIS. And a big thing with the course that's going to be released in the next little while with our WHIMIS 2015 Train the Trainer, this is going to give employers the tools to be able to do this type of training themselves, so they can really develop a full system so that they can not only train their workers, their existing workers, but also train their new staff that are coming aboard to all things that are included with WHIMIS on a site-specific and generic level. So Kieran, we had kind of touched on consumer products, and we were talking this morning, and you were going to look a little bit more into consumer products. Is there anything extra that we didn't, because we didn't really touch a whole lot on, we just, one slide on consumer products stating that, yeah, it's important to ensure that your employees are trained. Is there anything else that you can add to that today?
There is some stuff. I just have a couple windows in a tab on my desktop open. And I'll just touch on some of the things there on just how they're different, and maybe a little bit of pieces of legislation that add to it. So I'll just jump right into that. Bear with me here. So you guys are able to see this? You guys can see it? Okay, perfect. Just didn't hear any voices there. So jumping right into it, with consumer products, there's only 4 hazard symbols, and you'll notice that they are different than the pictograms used in WHIMIS. So the 4 classes here are toxic, which is the skull and crossbones, do not drink. Corrosive, with the skeleton hand being dunked into some liquid. Flammable, and explosive. So the explosive symbol is similar, just not in the same format of pictogram. So a couple other pieces of this legislation. So when you have these items, a lot of times the stuff under the sink that you don't want the kids to access, you'll notice that they have pretty large symbols on them if they are indeed having one of those hazard classes. So they classify them as chemical consumer products. So that means it has one of those 4 pictograms, as well as adhesive that causes the skin to adhere to itself. So within here, it tells you exactly how a company has to put these pictograms and information on the bottles, as well as hazard statements. So a pretty common hazard statement is danger, and then followed by the things that it can do. So I'll quickly get out of this share screen here and show you guys this chemical. It's backwards, but it shows the 2 things. So this is fondue gel. So not only is it flammable, it's poisonous, it's an irritant, and it's inflammable. So without too much research into all these things, it's just good to know that there is chemicals in your house that have consumer labels different than WHIMIS. So if you do have these products, make sure that when you find them, you understand the first aid measures. You could most likely Google an SDS sheet and find out, is this something I want to have in my house? For example, if there's an alternative that's not going to be poisonous, it could be a benefit to you. because these symbols don't talk about the inhalation hazard. They don't talk about if you get it on your skin, which is a dermal hazard. So through absorption, lots of times ingestion is pretty rare. But since at home we have kids and at work we generally don't, it's good to know and to keep these chemicals locked up or put out of the reach of kids. Without going too far into depth though, that's kind of what I looked at when I talked about the consumer products.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember even we were talking about this earlier, and I remember as a kid, my parents used to have like glow in the dark stickers, and they were shaped like a stop sign. They had like a little smiley face guy that was frowning with a hand that, you know, was like this. And because as a kid, you know, those symbols, they didn't really mean a whole lot to me, right? As a young child, right? And some products, you know, maybe something like this. Like this is just a common lubricant. Instead of WD-40, it's called Jigaloo. Some people really like the smell of WD-40, even to the point that I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a cologne, a WD-40 cologne. This smells great. Like if you use it in your house, like I have a gate that I installed permanently on at my steps for my kids. It squeaks sometimes. You spray a little Jigaloo on it. Smells great in the house. Something that smells great for a child, they may think that, hey, it might taste great too. And I mean, as adults, we think, how could some kid, you forget what it's like to be a kid. It's very common that a lot of dogs, especially we'll call them junkyard dogs, but they're, you know, they're used as protectors in scrap yards and things. A lot of places like that ask that you drain your vehicle of the antifreeze, because the antifreeze, dogs will lick that up and then they'll end up dying, right? They'll end up it ends up being fatal for them. So you know, there was some extra precautions taken by my parents, you know, outside of the locks that, you know, I have some child protective locks on my kids' dressers that my daughter can open, right? Once they figure that out, now they can open it. So, you know, you have these child protective locks, you have the sealable containers that are sealed up with child protective lids and stuff. But even sometimes then, you know, it's important to have that, pass that education on to your children, keep things out of reach the best you can, because sometimes these things do happen.
Yeah, children or backfeed. Children or other people, you know, like in the household. Just proper storage of what we have. I know as soon as I had kids, there was a lot of storage changes that happened. Instead of all the chemicals under the sinks, they now became new storage over top of the sinks, out of reach. Because my kids are like yours, Justin. They just figure out those child locks as soon as possible. It's like a mission in life to figure out how to get in when something's locked. So if it's out of reach, out of sight, out of mind, then way less likely for them to get into those cleaning products and stuff, which they, you know, lavender and whatever else they smell like. Something I wanted to discuss too is Kieran had mentioned having a lot of these commercial products at home, which is true, but a lot of times if you're handy or you're working on certain projects and stuff, you'll pick up something from a store. Like I went to an automotive store and I used to always buy these cans of brake clean to do automotive stuff, and then nothing cleans up grease or oil like a can of brake clean. Super not friendly to inhale or get on your skin or in your eyes and stuff like that. But if you look at the symbols on here, they would indicate this is a commercial product. So what I did is I was actually discussing this with the automotive place, and I'm talking to them about the amount of brake clean I go through and stuff like that. And we came up with a solution for me to bring home, and that was what is this thing? 18 liter jug of brake clean. That's now it's not in a compressed can. It's actually a liquid form of it that I had to buy a specific kind of container to decant it in that sprays this stuff, and it has proper seals in it and stuff, so it doesn't dry up, because this stuff's pretty nasty. So it'll wreck seals in a normal spray container, all that stuff. So I got this container, and then when I purchased it, I actually would, excuse me, was able to get a proper label for it, so I could indicate on there, brake clean, the actual supplier name, that it's a health hazard, flammability, some PPE. I got glasses and gloves on here, proper ventilation. So a lot of this is on here just in case I have even a friend over or something helping me out. This container without a proper label, it's a super hazardous material in here. For my home garage, it sure is. But it's economical. It makes sense. It's actually, I find it gets way less overspray, so it's a lot healthier to use in a low ventilated area and stuff. So it's a good solution for me, but I got to make sure that I'm also storing this properly. You see, it has a huge flammable pictogram on it, which indicates, I guess, the most hazardous of the pictograms, because if I look on the back of here, I actually have 3 pictograms for this product. So it is it has proper label on it. I can read all the information about it. The hazard statements are on the back of this container. I printed off the SDS for it so that I can use something like this in a residential setting, even though it's a commercial product and it's not used in a workplace. But still, why wouldn't I follow some of these regulations so that I can have safe use, handling, storage of this material,
Yeah, and it's a good point, because if you use enough of it, it is economical to buy the 18 liter pail. Now, granted, if you go through, say, the 18 liter in 365 days, okay, fantastic. You buy a new pail. That pail has been in good condition. It's stored properly. The thing we have to keep in mind is what happens when that pail, we bought it because we got it on sale, but we don't go through it for like 5 years. Now, all of a sudden, those labels become, wrecked a little bit. They become dirty. So it's really important that they remain legible, that you can read them at all times, that when you decant them, you can read those labels. It's very easy to buy stickers, to put stickers over top of it, to write it again if it starts to become illegible, to the point where you can't read the information anymore. And it's a good point that, you might have someone helping you in your garage, and, unbeknownst to you, you say there's 2 jugs that are 4 feet apart, and you go, can you go grab the freshener or something like that, something for cleaning up, orange spray or something like that, and they grab the brake cleaner and they start spraying their hands with it. I had an incident, this was many years ago, that I was working in the oil fields, and we were slow, so we ended up painting wellheads and stuff that before they went out. And so we're painting, and I'm like 18, I'm covered head to toe in blue paint. And so I go, what can I do to get this paint off? My wife's gonna kill me if I go home covered in paint. So he goes, yeah, there's some paint thinner over there. Well, you should never use paint thinner. There's other products that, Orange Clean and stuff that'll take paint off and everything. But, being 18, it's my supervisor, I go and I do it. And it's a big jug just like that. You pop the top, and he goes, it's in that jug. And there's a whole lineup. The whole wall is lined with black jugs. So I, pop the top, spin it off, pour some in my hands. Holy moly, it's taking it off like right now. I'm rubbing it up with my arms and everything. And it's just coming off like crazy. Then all of a sudden, my arms start turning absolute beet red. I don't even have anything in my home right now to describe how red, like a tomato. And I go, man, I'm having a bad reaction to this stuff. And he goes, well, what'd you use? And I said, well, what you told me to, the stuff in the black jug. Well, when I point over where the black jugs were, there's a whole line of black jugs. He goes, which one? So I knew which one it was because, being 18, I didn't put it back properly. I kind of had it still left out. And we turned it around, and it was paint remover, not paint thinner. So it's even more of a dangerous product to use on your skin. Thankfully, we had 1 million of those pockets for burn cream and stuff like that. And he's flipping through, trying to find the SDS sheets. Or at the time, it was MSDS sheets. And he's going through and he's trying to find it. And eventually, we just call poison control. And the after was still burning. And I'm going to the hospital, the whole 9 yards, right? So first off, to eliminate that whole situation, I should have used something that was actually made for your skin, right? Secondly, you know, something that was learned is, do you have proper access to the SDS sheets? Can you actually find for the chemical? Because you couldn't even find it. And that was another unfortunate part of the story that we ended up figuring out, right? So, I mean, making sure that you have everything labeled properly, that there's good education, good training on this stuff, it goes a long way.
Well, and understanding it, I think understanding, Justin, like you're saying, what is the product I'm actually using? Like, it's pretty important. There's a lot of people out there that feel like some PPE is designed for the up and coming worker or for someone that's new or something, and it's they don't mind having their whole hand and arm covered, for example, in paint and that. But for a home use, even around the house and stuff, this rubber glove is already been I must have used it to do something. A couple of boxes of rubber gloves. Now, these are just a common rubber glove. I'll use these for doing small automotive stuff and that. But I have these nice thick gauntlet style rubber gloves, and the cost of these compared to the benefit, it doesn't even equate. Like the amount of times that I'll use a glove like this and just get even oils, stuff like that on my hands, under my fingernails and that. And then I can just take that glove off in the end, and I don't have to worry about any of that absorption into the skin. And that we don't know, especially if we're doing this day in, day out, like for mechanics and stuff like that, some of the stuff that we're using and the antifreezes and that, over time, prolonged exposure over time to these products to our skin, and that can cause us some pretty serious health effects. Oh, you're still muted, Justin.
There we go. Thanks, Mike. It's important to know that, you know, what type of PPE, because some things, yeah, like those gloves are going to be perfect. Sometimes you need like a Petroflex glove, because it'll eat right through that latex, like no problem, right? Something like acetone is going to eat right through a latex glove. You know, and that could be just something you're using it for stripping shoe polish off your boots. You know, something like that, right? Where, you know, all of a sudden you look at the gloves and your fingers are right through them. I mean, it doesn't take if you don't have that SDS, if you don't have that information, even on a consumer product, you might not know. There's been a lot of cases where people have mixed other products with bleach because they want to make a super product. They want to really clean their toilet, and then all of a sudden, you know, it's creating this gas and this fumes to where, you know, especially nowadays where and by rights, people are scared. You know, they want to make sure services are disinfected. They want to make sure they have the appropriate PPE. And it's not that they're going overboard, but it's just the education just isn't there with these products. And, you know, I was speaking with someone just the other day about how they had a visit from Occupational Health and Safety, and not because they didn't have a WHIMIS program, not because they weren't providing proper education. This is an office setting, right, where they had just your regular consumer products. What they were concerned about, what OHS was concerned about, was, do they have an eye wash station? Because now they're implementing a little bit stronger chemicals, a little bit harder chemicals, you know, than your regular Windex. Do you have a product, or do you have anything to clean the eyes with in case you get this in the eyes? And this is something that people have to actually think about now, because we are introducing more and more products to the workplace, given the circumstances that we're in today. Do you have not only the proper PPE, but do you have preventative measures in place in case something bad happens? All it takes is you know, someone to open a door and you're mid-spray cleaning that glass window and you get Windex in the eye or something to that effect, right? And sometimes just going to the faucet and doing this with water, it's not enough. Something else too as well, everyone that's watching, on our website here, we do have a link to the WHIMIS regulations. I'll just do a quick screen share here just to kind of show you guys. All right. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I hit share here. So if you're going underneath of resources and documentations, forms, legislation, we have tons of different stuff in here. Everything from different safety manual document forms, your self-audit forms, your proficiency forms. But then when you come down here to legislation links, we have the SASC Employment Act. We have the Occupational Health and Safety Regulations, Occupational Health and Safety Prime Contractor Regulations, and then we have the Occupational Health and Safety Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System Regulations. So when you open up that, that'll actually give you all the 16 pages that are included in the regulations. And right here, when we go to Regulation 5 under Worker Education and Training, this will go through what you're actually mandated in Saskatchewan to ensure workers are trained in. And right here at the top, an employer shall ensure that a worker who works with a hazardous product or may be exposed to a hazardous product in the course of his or her work activities is informed about all hazard information received by the employer from a supplier concerning that hazardous product and any further hazard information that the employer is or ought to reasonably to be aware of concerning the use, storage, handling, disposal of that hazardous product. So there's no excuse to not have your workers trained in this, in any hazardous product that they may have in the workplace or that they may be exposed to, they may be moving around, whether it's in the warehouse. I know, you know, even some people work in the office and then have to travel through to the dock or to the garage area to go and get someone or whatever. Now, you know, it's 2 seconds or whatever, but sometimes those spots are so interlinked in a small environment where, you know, you come through the back door every morning. You're always walking through the shop. You're in the shop sometimes more than you find yourself in the office in the morning. Whatever the case is, you might think you're not involved in the process when actually you're more involved than you actually think you are. And if you're having trouble remembering some of these pictograms, we do have the WHIMIS 2015 pictograms poster. You know, I clicked on it. We'll see what comes up here if it's available. Well, it's available. It's just if my computer does it in time, because we are starting to run to the end of the webinar here. But I'd just like to show you this really quick here before we end off. This is something that you can download and then print off and make available to your workers, which it's obviously not going to pull up. So my internet's just slow. I've been having trouble with it all week. So I'm just going to stop my share here. And so we have this. Oh, of course, now it pops up. Here, just a quick screen share here to just show everybody. So you can print this off, and this is something that you can actually put up in your back shop, whatever the case is. And this gives you all the WHIMIS pictograms to make sure that your workers are informed at all times. All right. So just before we go, I just want to kind of remind everybody that on Tuesday, we have our Tuesday Toolbox Talk on hot weather and dehydration. And then next Wednesday at this same time, we're going to have a presentation by LRWS on harassment, harassment presentations. So information on harassment in the workplace. So it's going to be a very informative presentation. So I hope you guys all tune in. Again, this is recorded, so it'll be available on Facebook and our YouTube channel, along with all of our other videos that are available on our YouTube channel. So make sure you, you know, put a comment in the bar below if you have any questions, and we'll try and get to them. Or just go on our website. All our contact information is available there. So I hope everybody has a great, safe week and try and enjoy some of this hot weather. So take care, everyone.